The folder at the bottom of Adesua Bright's wardrobe had been there for 11 years. Not a box. Not a briefcase. A yellow manila folder with a torn corner and a rubber band that had gone brittle and cracked sometime around the 3rd year. Inside, a birth certificate, a land deed from 1994, and a photograph of a boy in a blue school uniform standing beside a woman in a wrapper with a smile so wide it changed the shape of her whole face. Adesua had not opened the folder in 3 years. But she had never moved it. Not when Tobena told her the house was too small for all of them. Not when he changed the locks on a Thursday morning while she was at the market. Not when she walked back to find her dresses in a black nylon bag by the gate with a note written in his assistant's handwriting. Because Tobena could not bring himself to write it himself. That Thursday was the 23rd of February. She stood at the gate with a nylon bag and the yellow folder and 4,700 naira in her wrapper pocket, and did not cry. The gateman, a man named Femi who had worked the property for 6 years, looked down at his feet. He did not look up until she walked away. What Tobena did not know, what he could not have known, because he had stopped asking her anything about her life 4 years before he changed the locks, was that the folder she carried out of that gate contained a document his entire company would spend 7 years trying to find. Adesua Nkachi Bright was 51 years old the morning she left that house. She weighed 54 kilograms, down from 63 in the years before Tobena began bringing Chinyer to the house for dinners he called business meetings. She wore a black polyester skirt she had bought at Tejuosho Market for 1,800 naira 3 months earlier, and a white blouse she had hand-washed in the bathroom sink the night before because the washing machine had been making a noise she did not want to complain about. The blouse was clean. The collar was pressed flat, with an iron she held in her hands for 40 minutes because the table the iron stand usually sat on had been moved, and she did not want to ask where. Worn, but clean. That was the line she had decided, years ago, that she would never cross below. She had grown up in Enugu in a house with a mother who pressed every piece of cloth before wearing it regardless of where they were going. Church, market, hospital. A second-hand dress pressed was still a pressed dress. That discipline was the only inheritance her mother gave her that no one could sell or confiscate or put in a black nylon bag and leave by a gate. Her name came from that mother, Mama Ekene, who died in 2009 in a general ward at Esut Teaching Hospital with Adesua beside her and Tobena in Lagos for a business meeting he said he could not reschedule. Her mother had held her hand for 3 days before the end, and on the last morning said only, "Your name means crown. Never take it off." Adesua had not understood it as instruction until the Thursday she found her clothes by the gate. She had one skill that she had been practicing since she was 14 years old, working beside her mother in their small provision store in Ogbeti. Numbers, not calculations on paper. Numbers in her head, moving in columns, balancing, speaking to each other. She could look at a shelf of goods and tell you the inventory value in 40 seconds. She could track 6 months of sales in her memory without writing a single figure down. When she married Tobena and he was still running a small building supply company out of Surulere, it was Adesua who sat behind the counter on Saturdays and told him exactly where the money was going and exactly where it was not. He called it her gift when it helped him. He called it interference when the company grew large enough to hire accountants with university certificates and glass offices. The yellow folder had been in her wardrobe since 2013, the year Tobena's father died, and left a will that nobody outside the family was supposed to have seen. Adesua had not gone looking for it. His father, Chief Bright, had sent it to her personally in a small envelope addressed in his own handwriting to Adesua Nkachi Bright, not Adesua Tobena Bright, a distinction she had noticed and filed away. She had read the will 3 times, replaced it in the envelope, and put it in the yellow folder behind the land deed and the birth certificate, without telling Tobena. She did not fully understand why at the time. She understood completely on the Thursday. She found her clothes by the gate. She walked from the house on Adeniyi Jones to the motor park at Oyota. 2 buses, 200 naira she counted from her pocket and handed to each conductor without looking at the fare board, because she had learned over the years to always know the cost of things before she needed them. She arrived at her cousin Ngozi's apartment in Bariga at 10 past noon. Ngozi opened the door, looked at the nylon bag and the yellow folder, and did not ask a single question. She took the bag from Adasua's hand and said, "Come inside. There is food." That night, lying on a foam mattress in Ngozi's sitting room with a ceiling fan that made a clicking sound every 3rd rotation, Adasua did not sleep. She counted. Not money, not years. She counted forward. What she knew, what she had, what could be done with what she had. By 3:17 a.m., she had a number. She did not write it down. She held it in the place in her mind where the columns lived. Ngozi's neighbor across the landing was a woman named Pauline Osei, who ran a small business registration and document service from a desk in her bedroom. Pauline was 63 years old, thin as cord, with reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and a memory for regulations that she used without mercy. She had registered 341 businesses in 8 years. She knew the Corporate Affairs Commission the way her mother had known the market, not by reading about it, but by showing up, week after week, until the clerks knew her name and the system had no corners left she had not turned. Ngozi introduced them on the second morning. Pauline looked at Adasua for exactly 1 moment, then looked at the yellow folder on the kitchen table and said, "What's in that?" Adasua told her, "Not everything." Enough, Pauline removed her reading glasses from the chain, put them on, and held out her hand. She read the land deed first, then the birth certificate. Then she unfolded the will, which was 4 pages with a signature at the bottom in the careful looping hand of a man who had learned to write in mission school. She read it twice. Then she took the glasses off, placed them back on the chain, and said something that made Adasua understand for the first time that the folder was not just a memory she had carried out of that gate. It was a foundation. "This property," Pauline said, setting the deed on the table with 2 fingers as though it were something that required handling with care, "was never his to begin with. If you can feel where this is going, stay with me. What happens next is something Tobena Bright, managing director of Bright Construction Holdings Limited, never once imagined was coming toward him." The property at 14 Okonkwo Close, Enugu, had been registered in Adasua's mother's name in 1994. Mama Ekene had purchased it from a man named Adasimbo with 180,000 naira she had saved over 11 years of market trading, a number Adasua remembered because her mother had told her once, quietly. The way she told her everything important. "I counted it every night for 11 years. When Mama Ekene died in 2009, no will had been formally probated. The property had simply sat, untouched, listed in nobody's new name, while the family assumed Tobena as the husband of the eldest daughter would handle the estate. Tobena had handled nothing. He had been busy with the business meeting he could not reschedule. What Chief Bright's will revealed, the document the old man had sent to Adasua personally, with her maiden name on the envelope, was that the original Bright family land in Enugu, on which a portion of Bright Construction's materials depot had been sitting for 6 years, was adjacent to and partly overlapping with the Okonkwo Close parcel. The depot had expanded in 2017. The survey had never been updated. The boundary had moved. Nobody had checked, because nobody had looked at the original 1994 deed in 20 years. Pauline knew a surveyor. She also knew a property lawyer named Chukwemeka Noosu, who worked from a small office in Ayeye and charged fees that were real fees, not the performance fees of men in glass towers who billed by the hour for the time it took them to pretend to think. Adesua paid Chukwemeka's consultation fee from the 4,700 naira in her pocket. He looked at the documents for 22 minutes, made 3 phone calls, and told her to come back on Friday. On Friday, he told her the case was not only viable, it was, in his word, clean. She spent the next 4 months in Ngozi's sitting room. She woke each morning at 5:30, made tea on a single-burner gas cooker, sat at the small table by the window, and worked. Pauline brought her additional documents from the CAC. Chukwemeka sent files. She read them all. She made notes on paper she bought in packets of 100 sheets from a stationery shop on Ikorodu Road. She organized the notes in the way she organized everything, by number, by date, by the logic of what had to come before what. She did not buy new clothes. She did not go to church, because she did not want to answer questions. She cooked for Ngozi on weekends and paid 8,000 naira per month for the foam mattress and the clicking ceiling fan from money Ngozi pretended was not needed, and Adesua insisted on paying, because she had decided a long time ago that dignity was not something you could choose to maintain only when it was easy. In the 5th month, she got a job. Not a job she applied for. A job that came to her the way everything in this part of the story came to her, through Pauline, who had a client named Alhaji Danjuma, who ran a mid-sized construction supply company in Ikeja, and whose accounts department had recently lost a woman who kept numbers in her head, and whom nobody had been able to replace despite interviewing 14 candidates. Pauline sent him Adesua's name in a single sentence. She said Adesua could tell him his inventory value in 40 seconds without looking at a shelf twice. Alhaji Danjuma brought her in on a Tuesday. He put her in the warehouse, pointed at 3 shelves of fittings and supplies worth approximately 4.7 million naira in his estimate, and said, "Tell me what you see." She looked for 38 seconds. Then she told him. The figure was 4,682,400 naira. His last formal count had put it at 4,710,000. The difference was a consignment of PVC elbows in the back left corner that had been miscounted as a full box when 11 pieces were missing from the bottom layer. He hired her the same afternoon. The salary was 185,000 naira per month. It was the first salary she had ever received. Everything she had done for Tobena's company across 23 years of their marriage had a different name. She did not tell anyone at work about the case. She came in at 7, left at 5, took public transport both ways, and sat at the table in Ngozi's sitting room in the evenings, with her notes and her tea. By the end of the 2nd month at Alhaji Danjuma's, she had saved 230,000 naira in a new account she opened at a bank on Allen Avenue, where nobody knew her married name. She told the bank officer her name was Adesua Nkachi, because that was her name, because it had always been her name, and because Tobena Bright was a name she had borrowed and returned. The case was filed in the 7th month. Chukwemeka advised a quiet filing, no press, no noise. Let the summons arrive first. Let the response tell them what they were dealing with. The response told them a great deal. Tobena's legal team was a firm called Adeyemi and Partners from Victoria Island, with offices on the 14th floor of a building with a glass front that reflected the marina. They filed a 47-page counter-response. 47 pages for a matter Chukwemeka had summarized in 4. Adesua read all 47 pages in one evening, made notes on 2 sheets of paper, and sent Chukwemeka a message with 3 questions he had not thought to ask, and 1 document reference the opposing counsel had cited incorrectly. Chukwemeka called her at 10:48 that night. He said, "I need you to understand that you are not my client's assistant. You are my client. she said. I understand. Now, answer the 3 questions. The case moved through 2 preliminary hearings over 4 months. At both hearings, Tobena did not attend. His lawyers attended. His lawyers were composed men in well-cut suits who spoke in complete sentences and called the judge my lord with a cadence that suggested they had said it 1,000 times and intended to say it 1,000 more. The 3rd hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. On the Wednesday before the 3rd hearing, Adesua received a call from a number she did not recognize. She knew the voice immediately. 7 years and a completely different set of circumstances had not changed it in any particular way that mattered. Tobena said, I need to talk to you. She said, Your lawyers have my lawyer's number. He said, Not about the case. There was a pause. The clicking ceiling fan turned above her in Ngozi's sitting room. It had been making the same sound for 7 months, and she had stopped hearing it sometime in the 3rd month, and then started hearing it again when things went quiet like this. She said, Then we have nothing to talk about. He said her name. The full name, Adesua Nkachi, not Adesua Tobena. Her name, the way his father had written it on the envelope. She said, Thursday. The court has everything. She ended the call, set the phone on the table, and made a cup of tea she did not drink. The 3rd hearing was a Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Adesua arrived at 8:23 in a navy blue dress she had bought 2 weeks earlier for 7,500 naira from a boutique in Ikeja. It was not the most expensive thing she owned. It was the most appropriate thing she owned for a Thursday morning in a room where everything would be decided. She pressed it the night before. She wore the shoes she had worn to Tobena's company dinner 6 years ago. Black leather with low heels, polished the night before with a cloth and a tin of cream she kept in the bottom of the bag she now carried. A brown leather bag with brass fittings that had belonged to her mother and smelled still faintly of the shea butter Mama Akane used every morning without exception. Tobena arrived at 8:51. He came through the main corridor with his 2 lawyers and a junior associate carrying a file bag. He was heavier than he had been 7 years ago. He wore a gray suit. He did not look at her when he walked past. Then he stopped, turned, and looked at her for the first time since the Thursday of the nylon bag and the gate and the gateman who looked at his feet. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that was not already in the papers before the judge. What happened in the courtroom that morning took 2 hours and 16 minutes. What the judge said at the end of those 2 hours and 16 minutes took 4 minutes to read and a lifetime to understand. The encroachment on the Okonkwo close parcel was confirmed. The property reverted to the estate of Mama Ekene. As the sole surviving daughter, Adesua Nkachi, born in Enugu in 1972, according to the birth certificate with the torn corner that had lived in the yellow folder for 11 years, was the estate's heir. Bright Construction Holdings was given 90 days to vacate the encroached portion and compensate for 6 years of unauthorized use at a rate calculated from the survey report. The number was significant, not a number that destroyed a company, a number that reminded a company of what it had taken without asking. Tobena sat very still when the judge read the final order. His lead lawyer placed a hand on the table between them, not on Tobena's arm, just on the table near enough to suggest steadiness without assuming it was needed. Tobena's face did not change, but his hands, folded on the table in front of him, slowly moved apart and came to rest flat on the wood, palms down, the way a man might place his hands when he is recalibrating the ground beneath him. Adesua stood outside the court building at 11:47 in the morning and called Ngozi. The phone rang twice. Ngozi picked up and said, "Tell me." Adesua said, "Thursday was a good day." Ngozi laughed. The kind of laugh that is mostly something else with a thin layer of laugh over it. Adesua stood in the November sun on the pavement outside the court with her mother's bag over one shoulder and the yellow folder tucked under her arm, and let Ngozi laugh for a moment before saying, "I'll be back for dinner." She stopped at a woman selling roasted corn on the pavement at the end of the block and bought 2 ears for 200 naira and stood eating them on the street in her navy blue dress and her polished low-heeled shoes, and thought about a woman in Enugu who had saved 180,000 naira over 11 years by counting it every night. She did not think about Tobena. She thought about the number. Within 18 months of the court order, Adesua had used the compensation settlement and the title to the Okonkwo Close property, now cleared of the encroachment, now free, to register her own company, not a construction company, a materials verification and audit firm. 3 staff. One of them was Pauline Osei's daughter, who had a degree in accounting from Covenant University and the same capacity for regulation that her mother had for CAC procedures. The second was a young man named Emeka, who could read a supply manifest the way Adesua could read a shelf. The third did the administrative work and answered the phone with a precision and warmth that Adesua had told her. In the first week of employment, were both non-negotiable. Alhaji Danjuma was their first client. He gave them the contract himself, on a Friday afternoon in his office in Ikeja, across a desk covered in papers he had been meaning to organize since 2022. He said, "I should have offered you this a year ago." She said, "Yes." He signed the contract. 7 months after the company registered, Bright Construction Holdings became client number 11. The engagement came through their procurement department, not through Tobena. It was a standard verification contract. Adesua reviewed it and signed it without a meeting. The work was clean and correct and completed on time, and the report went to Bright Construction's procurement manager, a man named Adiaze, who had joined the company after Adesua left and had no context for any previous chapter of anything. She never spoke to Tobena again. What Tobena thought he gave Adesua on that Thursday 7 years ago was an ending. He thought he handed her nothing. A nylon bag, a foam mattress in a cousin's sitting room, 4,700 naira in her pocket, and the world she had built for 23 years, locked behind a gate he had changed the combination on. But the truth is, he gave her a key. He handed her the folder and told her to leave, and she left with the only thing that could outlast everything he had built, and the only thing he had never once thought to check. You cannot look at a person carrying a worn blouse and a brown bag and know what she is carrying inside the bag. You cannot look at a woman standing at a gate in the morning and know what she has been counting at 3:17 a.m. in her mind, in the columns where nobody can reach. You cannot take a name from a woman whose mother told her the name was a crown. You can change the locks. You can write the note in someone else's handwriting. You can have the gateman look at his feet. But the foundation does not move. It waits. It hardens. And one Thursday morning 7 years later, it holds every weight in the room. Adesua Nkachi sat in her own office, a small second-floor office on a street in Ikeja with a window that faced east and caught the early morning light, and pressed a single piece of paper flat on her desk with both hands. It was a new client intake form. She read it once, made 2 notes in the margin in her own handwriting, and put it in a folder. A yellow folder. New, with a rubber band that had not yet gone brittle. On the front she wrote the client's name in the careful, deliberate hand of a woman who had learned from her mother that the way you write a name is a statement about how much you value the thing the name contains. She pressed it flat. She filed it. She looked out the east-facing window for a moment. Then she went back to work. If a man took everything you built together and gave you only the folder you walked out carrying, what would you do with what was inside? Not what would you feel. What would you do? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.